This is Samuel, in the middle of that community hall with peeling walls, where the smell of weak coffee mixed with dust. They called him Boy, a nobody, and laughed openly when he dared to speak of faith and respect. They humiliated him in front of everyone, treating him like an insignificant servant. Little did they know they were mocking the man who, in silence, paid for every chair they sat on, for every piece of bread served, and for the very project they presented with such arrogance. In that instant, his world stopped, and a question echoed in his soul. Has your faith ever been tested in such a public and unjust way, right in front of those you were trying to help? Before I tell you how God acted in his life in that hall, right after that humiliation that left him shattered, tell me in the comments which city you are watching us from, and take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what happens when we understand that our strength is not in what others see, but in what God knows about us. Believe me, God's answer to the affront Samuel suffered is a powerful lesson for us all. The community hall was a faithful portrait of the neighborhood, simple, somewhat forgotten by the government, but full of a stubborn dignity. The plastic chairs, arranged in crooked rows, welcomed residents whose faces told stories of struggle and hope. It was a real place where people had no time for masks. The air carried this duality, an expectation for the new. Promised project, but also a skepticism learned from years of empty promises. Samuel felt this energy in the air, a mixture of faith and weariness that he knew very well, for it was the same energy that moved him. On the other side of the room, representing a completely different world, were Ricardo and his assistant, Carla. They were from the NGO, the managers. Ricardo, with his well-tailored suit and a watch worth more than the rent of many families there, spoke with a cold, paternalistic tone. To him, these people were numbers on a spreadsheet, a step in his career. He used words like resource optimization and measurable impact, emptying the soul of the work that should have been about people. Carla imitated him with a forced smile and a gaze that measured everyone and everything, deciding who was important and who was not. Samuel was in his corner, quiet, serving coffee and a simple, sweet bread that he himself had bought earlier. At 26, his face with strong features and a serene look did not betray the power he carried. His clothes, worn jeans and a basic t-shirt camouflaged him perfectly among the others. To the managers, he was just part of the scenery, just another volunteer. And that was exactly how he liked it. Raised on church pews, he learned from his grandmother that God's work flourishes in humility, far from the spotlight and applause. Silent service was his form of prayer, his way of honoring God. Ricardo's presentation began, and the discomfort in the room grew with each slide. He spoke of a professional training project that completely ignored the local culture, the schedules of mothers who needed to pick up their children from school, and the wisdom of the elders. It was a cookie-cutter plan, created in an air-conditioned office miles away. Mrs. Maria, a white-haired lady with unwavering faith, shook her head in silent disapproval. She, who knew every soul in that neighborhood, saw the lack of respect in those beautiful but empty words. Her eyes met Samuel's, and she saw in him a calm that intrigued her. Samuel felt his heart ache. He had spent the last few weeks there, not as a founder, but as a friend. He had sat on the park benches, listened to the stories, understood the pains and dreams. The plan he had devised with his foundation was based on listening, on respect, and now he saw it all being distorted by pure vanity. He couldn't stay silent, not for himself, but for those people. With his heart pounding, but with the peace that only prayer brings, he slowly stood up. His voice sounded clear and firm in the hall, cutting through Ricardo's monologue. "Excuse me, Mr. Ricardo," he began with a humility that contrasted with the other's arrogance. "I have been talking with some of the residents, and perhaps if we adjusted the course schedules to after 7 in the evening, more mothers could participate. And maybe we could include a cooking workshop with Mrs. Teresina, who makes the best acarajé in the region." He spoke with the simplicity of someone who knows the reality, not with the authority of someone who gives orders. Ricardo's reaction was immediate and cruel. He stopped, looked Samuel up and down with visible contempt, and let out a mocking laugh. "Listen here, boy," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Who do you think you are to give an opinion on my project? We work with strategy, with data, not with the hunches of someone who serves coffee. Your job is to fill the cups, so do that. Leave the prayers for the church, and the planning for those who know what they're doing. This is the real world. The humiliation was like a slap in the face, and the low laughter from Carla and other team members was like salt in the wound. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with embarrassment and indignation. The residents looked at Samuel with pity, others at Ricardo with restrained anger. In that moment, Samuel felt the heat rise to his face. The anger, the urge to respond in kind, to put that man in his place, screamed inside him. He could, with a single sentence, bring Ricardo's world crashing down. "The coffee boy is the owner of the foundation that pays your salary," he could say. But amidst the turmoil, a stronger voice, the voice of his faith, whispered in his spirit, "My justice does not come from shouting but from silence. Trust in me." So Samuel closed his eyes. For just a second, maybe two, he disconnected from the hall, from Carla's laughter, from Ricardo's arrogant gaze. In that inner silence, he did not ask for revenge or immediate justice. He simply asked for the strength to honor God with his reaction. He remembered his grandmother telling him years ago, as they planted a basil plant in their backyard, "My son, the greatest strength is not in retaliating against an offense, but in having a heart so full of God that the offense finds no place to dwell." He took a deep breath, and when he opened his eyes, the anger had transformed into a disconcerting serenity, a peace that the world could neither give nor take away. He looked directly at Ricardo, not with defiance, but with a calmness that seemed to absorb all the hostility in the environment. His gaze was not that of a defeated man. It was the look of someone who knows something others do not, of someone anchored to an invisible rock. The entire room, which had expected an argument, a shouting match, or a humiliating retreat, held its breath. Samuel's silence was louder than any shout. Ricardo, who fed on reactions, power, and intimidation, was visibly at a loss. He expected fear and found peace. He expected weakness and found a strength he could not decipher. And it was with this peace that Samuel's voice came out, gentle but firm. "You are right, sir," he said, and the words carried not a hint of sarcasm. "The most important thing is that the work is well done for the people here." He was not apologizing, nor was he submitting. He was elevating the conversation to another level. By agreeing, he disarmed Ricardo completely, taking away his power to continue the attack. With that sentence, Samuel showed that his concern was not for his own wounded ego, but for the mission that had brought them there. That act of humility was, in fact, a demonstration of supreme leadership. Immediately after, Samuel did something that shifted the power axis in the hall. He turned his back on Ricardo and his team, a gesture that symbolically made them irrelevant, and walked slowly towards Mrs. Maria, who was watching him with teary-eyed admiration. In doing so, he transferred the authority in the room. The power no longer lay with the man in the suit who held the money and the project, but with the matriarch of the community, the representative of faith and popular wisdom. He approached her with genuine respect, as a son would approach a mother for advice. Standing before her, he looked her in the eyes and asked, his voice soft but audible to all, "Mrs. Maria, do you believe that God can bless this project, even if it starts off on the wrong foot?" The question was like a spiritual arrow. It was not for Ricardo. It was not about spreadsheets or strategies. It was a question of faith, directed at the person who best understood what it was to trust God in the midst of difficulties. Samuel was inviting the community to hold on to faith instead of being contaminated by the arrogance they had just witnessed. Ricardo and Carla looked at each other, completely lost. There was no standard operating procedure to respond to that. Mrs. Maria held Samuel's hand. Her skin was wrinkled, marked by time and work, but her touch was firm and warm. She looked at the young man and then swept the hall with a look of authority that no one dared to challenge. "My son," she said, her voice choked with emotion but full of conviction, "God never starts any work on the wrong foot. Sometimes He just allows the tares to show themselves first, so that we know where the real wheat comes from. God's blessing is already here because He sent a servant with a heart as pure as yours." Each word was a balm for Samuel, and a sentence for Ricardo's pride. Ricardo tried to regain control of the situation. He forced a laugh, a hollow, nervous sound that convinced no one. "Very nice, very poetic," he said, adjusting his tie, "but we have a schedule to keep. Let's get back to the slides, please." He pointed to the screen, but it was too late. The atmosphere had irrevocably changed. No one was looking at the presentation anymore. The residents' eyes were fixed on Samuel and Mrs. Maria, on that silent alliance of faith and dignity. The NGO's million-dollar project, in that instant, seemed small and insignificant compared to the lesson in humanity that everyone was witnessing. With a serene smile, Samuel moved away from Mrs. Maria and, instead of sitting down, walked back to the coffee table in the corner of the room. He picked up a pitcher of water and began to fill the empty glasses, including Ricardo's, who looked at him in disbelief. He was not doing it as a humiliated servant, but as someone who understands that serving is the greatest act of greatness. Every gesture of his was a silent sermon. He was at peace, certain that he had done his part. He had planted the seed of humility and respect. Now he just watched, waiting for God to do the rest. He knew with all his faith that the answer was on its way. The air in the hall grew thick, almost unbreathable. Ricardo's presentation continued, but his words floated in a void, finding no echo. The residents whispered among themselves, not about the project, but about the coffee boy's attitude. Some saw him with renewed admiration, others still with pity, not understanding the depth of what had happened. Carla, the assistant, no longer smiled. Her face was a mask of discomfort as she realized they had completely lost control of the narrative, and, more importantly, the respect of these people. It was then that a sound broke the monotony of Ricardo's voice, a heavy metallic creak coming from the back door of the hall, which opened onto a small patio. At first it was a low sound, almost imperceptible, muffled by the manager's speech, but the sound repeated, followed by the noise of firm footsteps approaching. Most people didn't notice, focused on the silent drama unfolding, but Samuel heard. He slowly raised his face, a slight smile forming at the corner of his lips. It was as if he felt a change in the atmosphere, the arrival of something or someone he had been unknowingly waiting for. Divine justice, he thought, sometimes opens the door without asking for permission. The door swung open with a jolt, revealing a middle-aged man with graying hair and an elegant yet discreet suit. He seemed a little lost, looking around the simple hall with an expression of curiosity. His presence immediately commanded respect. It wasn't Ricardo's arrogance, but a natural authority, of someone accustomed to leading. Ricardo stopped speaking mid-sentence, his mouth agape. His eyes widened and he paled visibly. Carla brought a hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp of shock. That man was Dr. Almeida, the national director of the NGO, the supreme boss. The last person Ricardo expected to see in that forgotten neighborhood, on a surprise visit. The silence in the hall was absolute, broken only by the sound of Dr. Almeida's footsteps on the concrete floor. All eyes turned to him, the community with curiosity, the NGO team with panic. Dr. Almeida completely ignored Ricardo, who was frozen on the makeshift stage like a statue. His eyes swept the room, passing over the rows of residents, until they landed on Samuel, who remained near the coffee table holding a pitcher of water. The moment he saw him, the director's face lit up with a genuine, warm and respectful smile. It was the smile of someone reuniting with an old and dear friend. He walked decisively across the hall, his route tracing a straight line toward Samuel. He passed by Ricardo without giving him a single glance, as if the project manager were invisible. The tension was almost physical. Each step the director took seemed to echo the humiliation Ricardo had imposed on Samuel minutes before. Upon reaching the young man, Dr. Almeida did not extend his hand for a formal shake. Instead, he opened his arms and gave Samuel a tight, affectionate hug, a gesture that shocked everyone and sealed Ricardo's fate. "Samuel, my friend, what a wonderful surprise," he said loudly. "I knew I would find you here, hands-on among the people. That's why I admire you so much." Samuel returned the hug with the same serenity as before. There was no triumph on his face, only the peace of one who sees divine providence manifest. Dr. Almeida stepped back a little but kept his hand on Samuel's shoulder, a clear gesture of support and partnership. Then he turned to the dumbfounded team, to Ricardo, who seemed to have shrunk on the stage, and to the community watching the scene without blinking. His voice rang out clear and strong, filled with unquestionable authority. "Everyone," he began, "I want you all to meet the heart and soul behind everything that is happening here today." He paused dramatically. ensuring he had the attention of every person in that room. Ricardo's world began to crumble in slow motion. He looked from Dr. Almeida to Samuel, confusion and dread mixing on his face. He couldn't process it. The coffee boy, the nobody he had humiliated. How was that possible? Every second of the director's silence was another nail in the coffin of his arrogance. The truth was about to be revealed, and it would be as public and impactful as the humiliation he had orchestrated. "This here," continued Dr. Almeida, squeezing Samuel's shoulder firmly, "is Samuel, the founder and president of the Divine Heritage Foundation, the man whose faith, vision, and generosity are financing 100% of this project and many others across the country." The sentence dropped like a bomb in the hall. The silence that followed was the deepest and heaviest of all. It was no longer a silence of embarrassment, but of pure shock, of revelation. Reality reconfigured itself before everyone's eyes. The servant was the master. The humiliated was the honored. The coffee boy was the pillar supporting everything. Jaws dropped. Ricardo staggered backward, leaning on the presentation table. As if his legs had lost their strength, his skin, once pale, now took on a grayish hue. Carla looked as if she had seen a ghost. The residents, in turn, began to whisper, but now with a tone of awe and admiration. Mrs. Maria was smiling, a smile of someone who had always known, who had felt the greatness of that young man in her spirit. She was not surprised by Samuel's identity, but by the perfect and timely way God chose to reveal it. Divine justice had not come with thunder and lightning, but with a hug and a sentence. Samuel remained quiet beside Dr. Almeida. He did not look at Ricardo with contempt or at the audience with arrogance. His gaze remained serene, almost melancholic. He felt no pleasure in the other's downfall, for his faith had taught him to have compassion even for those who hurt him. He knew that this moment was not about him, but about the lesson God wanted to teach everyone there. The lesson that true authority does not come from a title, a suit, or a bank account. It comes from a heart that serves, a spirit that humbles itself, and a faith that trusts in God's timing. Ricardo, in an act of desperation, tried to stammer something. "Dr. Almeida, I didn't know." He didn't say anything. His voice failed him. He was exposed, naked in his pride. Dr. Almeida cut him off with a cold glare, a look that said it all. Not a word needed to be said. The reprimand was in the silence, in the contrast between the hug given to Samuel and the indifference directed at him. The judgment had already been passed, not by words but by actions, and the sentence was public shame, the exact punishment he had tried to impose on a man of God. The director then addressed the community, his voice now soft and respectful. "I apologize on behalf of our organization for any disrespect you may have felt here today," he said, glancing at Ricardo. "The original plan, the one that Samuel himself helped create, will be followed to the letter. A plan based on listening and respect for this community." With that, he completely discredited Ricardo in front of everyone, validating Samuel's intervention and restoring the dignity of the residents. The tables had completely turned. Justice had not only been done, it had been witnessed by all. Ricardo's body seemed to wither inside his expensive suit. The tie, once a symbol of his status, now seemed to choke him. His face, once red with anger and arrogance, was now pale with shame and fear. He looked at the floor, unable to face the people he had treated with such disdain just minutes before. Each second of silence was a new wave of humiliation, a replay in his mind of his own cruel words. "Boy, who do you think you are?" He finally understood who Samuel was, and that realization crushed his ego definitively. Divine justice, he realized too late, did not need a courtroom. The stage was the very scene of his sin. Carla, for her part, couldn't face anyone. She felt the weight of every gaze in the room, even if they weren't directed at her. Her laughter, which had echoed in support of her boss's mockery, now burned in her memory. She felt ashamed, not just for the error in judgment, but for her own pettiness, for having participated in such a cruel act to align herself with power. In that moment, she saw the difference between Ricardo's forced authority and Samuel's genuine authority, and the comparison made her feel miserable. She was an accomplice, not just to a professional blunder, but to a profound moral injustice. The whispers that spread through the community were no longer of pity, but of reverence. So it was him, said a lady in the front row. A true man of God, added another. They looked at Samuel in a completely new way. He was no longer the helpful young man, the quiet coffee boy. He was a leader, a brother whose strength was not in a loud voice, but in a calm presence. Mrs. Maria just nodded her head, a gesture of silent confirmation. Her eyes met Samuel's, and in that exchange of glances, there was a universe of shared understanding. Her faith had been honored, and the servant she had recognized had been exalted before everyone. While the emotional chaos settled around him, Samuel's mind was surprisingly calm. He did not feel the ecstasy of victory, but a solemn weight. That moment was not a celebration of his status, but a demonstration of God's power. He remembered a passage he often read, about God using the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. He, the coffee boy, a young black man in simple clothes, had been the instrument to expose the arrogance of the corporate world. He felt gratitude, but also an enormous responsibility. The honor he received was not his. It was a divine loan that he needed to manage with even more humility. With a gentle gesture, Samuel touched Dr. Almeida's arm, drawing attention to himself. He took a step forward, and the room fell silent again. His voice, still serene, addressed the community. "My brothers and sisters," he began, using the language of the church, the language of his soul. "Please forgive me for not introducing myself earlier. My only desire has always been for this project to be about you, not about me. God's blessing is for this community, and that is what matters." His words, full of humility, sealed his leadership. He did not use the power to exalt himself, but to connect even more with the people. Dr. Almeida then turned to Ricardo, whose figure seemed to shrink with each passing second. The director did not shout, did not fire him there in front of everyone. His punishment was more subtle, and for that very reason, more devastating. "Ricardo," he said in a low, sharp voice, "I think your presentation is over. Please wait for me in the car." The order, given with an icy calm, was the final nail in the coffin. Being sent to wait in the car like a chauffeur was the ultimate degradation for a man who lived for status and appearances. It was the public nullification of all his importance. Ricardo's walk to the back door was the longest and loneliest of his life. He did not look to the side, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor. Each step was heavy, accompanied by the judgmental silence of dozens of people. The sound of his expensive shoes on the concrete floor was the only thing to be heard. No one said a word, but he felt the weight of every gaze on his back. It was the walk of shame, the pilgrimage of a king deposed from his cardboard throne, forced to abandon the castle that he himself, with his arrogance, had set on fire. As soon as the door closed behind him, it was as if the hall could breathe again. The tension dissipated, replaced by a feeling of relief and renewal. The mask had fallen, the truth had been revealed, and justice in one way or another had been served. Dr. Almeida, with the wisdom of a good leader, quickly changed the focus. "Well, now that things are clearer," he said with a smile, "how about we hear Samuel's and Mrs. Maria's ideas on how we can make this project really work for you?" The community applauded, a sound of hope and joy. Dr. Almeida turned to Samuel, the warm smile returning to his face. "I called you earlier, but you didn't answer. I figured you'd already be here serving coffee," he said in a low voice so only Samuel could hear. "You never change, my friend. That's why God honors you." Samuel just smiled back, a tired but grateful smile. He knew the director's admiration was sincere, but his heart was elsewhere. He looked at the door through which Ricardo had left, feeling not anger but a pang of compassion. For Samuel, the story of that day was not yet over. God's justice, he had learned, was not just about exposing the proud. It was also about offering a chance of redemption to the humbled. The public victory would have no value if it were not followed by a private act of mercy. He knew, with a certainty that came from the depths of his soul, that he still needed to have a conversation with Ricardo. Not to humiliate him further, but to show him the path he himself had learned to walk, the path of humility, service, and purpose that goes beyond the world's applause. After the door closed, the atmosphere in the hall changed completely. The tension dissipated like mist in the morning sun, giving way to a lively and hopeful buzz. Dr. Almeida, with the skill of a conductor, passed the floor to Samuel, who in turn immediately included Mrs. Maria in the conversation. They sat on plastic chairs, on the same level as everyone else. And what followed was not a presentation, but a conversation circle. The ideas Samuel had collected in his weeks of listening came to the surface, enriched by the suggestions of the residents themselves, who now felt seen, heard, and above all respected. The real meeting was just beginning. Samuel did not act like a boss or a funder. He was a facilitator, a brother. He asked questions, listened attentively, and wrote everything down in a simple notebook. When someone gave a good idea, he made sure to say it out loud. "Mr. Juan's suggestion is excellent. Let's include that." He transferred the credit, distributed the authorship, and in doing so, empowered every person there. He was building the project with them, not for them. The honor God gave him did not put him on a pedestal. On the contrary, it made him come down even lower, to serve with more wisdom and love. While the conversation flowed, Carla remained in a corner, motionless. She had not been sent to the car, but her paralysis was a prison. She watched Samuel, the man she and her boss had ridiculed, lead with a grace and humility she had never seen. On an impulse, she began to collect the empty plastic cups and wipe the coffee table, the same job they had used to belittle Samuel. It was a small, almost invisible act, but for her, it was the beginning of a silent penance, an attempt to rid herself of the arrogance that had contaminated her. The meeting extended into the afternoon. The sun began to set, painting the simple hall with a warm, golden light. When they finished, there was a concrete action plan, born of collaboration and mutual respect. People said their goodbyes with hugs and smiles, thanking Samuel not for the money, but for the restored dignity. Samuel's heart was full, but he knew his mission for the day was not yet complete. He said goodbye to everyone, promising to return the following week, and walked towards the back. Sadokta for the final encounter, his conscience demanded. Outside, night was beginning to fall. Next to the luxury car, which looked like an alien object in that simple setting, was Ricardo. He was not impatient or angry. He was huddled in the passenger seat, his head in his hands. The imposing figure of the project manager had disappeared, replaced by a man who seemed to have lost everything. Samuel approached in silence and, without a word, handed him a bottle of water. The same gesture of service, but now laden with a completely different meaning. Ricardo raised his face, his eyes red and swollen, and accepted the water with trembling hands. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile. Samuel leaned against the car, looking at the darkening sky. "Ricardo," he began in a gentle voice, "what happened today wasn't about me or you. It was about purpose. For a moment, you forgot who your work was really for. It's not for the reports nor for the bosses, it's for them." He nodded towards the hall from where the sound of laughter still came. "I know what that's like, because I've lost my way too." Ricardo looked at him, surprised. "You?" he asked, incredulous. "Yes," Samuel replied. "In the beginning of the foundation, I worried so much about the numbers, about growth, that I almost forgot the people. The biggest trap isn't failure, Ricardo. It's the success that goes to your head and makes you think you're better than others. We forget that everything we have is a gift from God, and that the only purpose of having something is to serve those who have not. The position passes, the money runs out, but the good you do in someone's life, that lasts for eternity." Samuel's words were not an accusation, but a mirror. Ricardo broke down. The tears he had been holding back rolled down his face, tears of shame, of regret, and of a deep pain for having realized his own smallness. "I ruined everything," he sobbed. "I was an idiot, an arrogant fool. I humiliated you." Samuel placed a hand on his shoulder, the same gesture Dr. Almeida had made to him, but now it was a gesture of mercy. "It's not too late to start over," Samuel said. "Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. Maybe today wasn't the end of your career, but the beginning of your true ministry." Ricardo was not fired. Dr. Almeida, after a long conversation with Samuel, understood that mercy could be more transformative than punishment. He was transferred. He left the luxurious headquarters in the capital and went to coordinate a small project for the recovery of drug addicts in the countryside, a job without glamour, without spotlights, where the only measure of success was the restored life of another person. It was there, far from power and vanity, that Ricardo began to understand what Samuel had told him. He began to find his purpose in service. The project in Samuel's community flourished in a way that no spreadsheet could have predicted. It became a model of community management, a place where faith and action went hand in hand. But the greatest legacy of that day was not the courses or the renovations. It was the story of the coffee boy who, in silence, showed everyone the true meaning of strength. It became a testimony told and retold in prayer meetings, in street corner conversations, a living reminder of how God works in mysterious ways. Samuel's honor was restored not by his own hand, but by the hand of God, who used one man's pride to exalt another's humility. The community no longer saw him as a quiet young man, but as a spiritual giant, a leader whose authority came not from what he possessed, but from who he was in God. They learned that anointing does not need a stage or a microphone. It manifests itself in silent service, in a forgiving heart, and in faith that waits patiently for divine justice. That day, everyone in that hall learned a lesson they would never forget. They learned that the world may judge by appearance, by title, by skin color, or by the clothes one wears, but God looks at the heart. He knows the strength that resides in the humble soul, and at the exact moment, He himself takes charge of revealing the true anointing, settling the score with arrogance in a way that only He can, not with vengeance, but with a justice that transforms and redeems. Samuel's journey and the turnaround God provided in his life are proof that genuine faith never goes unnoticed in the Father's eyes. True strength is not in retaliating, but in trusting that His justice will come at the right time. That episode forever marks not only the community, but also the heart of a man who learned the hard way that power without purpose is empty, and that humility is the language God honors most. If you know someone who is going through a trial and needs to have their faith strengthened, please share this video. Samuel's story may be the light that person needs to keep believing. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about how faith in God can move mountains and transform the most unjust situations into testimonies of glory.